Welcome everyone. Nice that you're joining us today. So let's have a look first of all what is on the agenda for today. So we will be having a look at 5 points today. The first is knowing your audience. We will then move on to getting started, so focusing in on questions. We will then look at voice and intonation, and then we will move on to signpost language. And finally, we will finish off today with talking about visual aids. And of course, there will be a summary at the end and a chance to ask any questions. I'm just going to admit some more people just coming in, some latecomers. One moment. Yeah, okay. So welcome to those who've just joined. Okay, so actually, before I start talking, I would really like to hear from you. So we're going to kick straight off with a poll. So I'm just going to get that organized now, but you can see on your screen what the question will be. And basically, I'd like to know what area from these three, so you can only choose one, do you think is the most important when giving a presentation? So I'm thinking about an actual full presentation, not just sharing some ideas in a Teams meeting, for example. I'll organize the poll, just one moment. Okay, so you should see on your screen coming up which of the three areas is the most important when giving a speech or presentation. Knowing your audience, number one, using interesting visual aids like PowerPoint, or the presenter's voice. Well, I've already seen quite a lot of people choosing knowing your audience. That's interesting. The presenter's voice as well has come up. Fantastic. I'll just give a few more seconds to see if everybody has put in an answer. Okay, let's end the poll there and I'll share the results. So basically, most of you think that knowing your audience is the most important ingredient. Well, let's have a look. I think I'd agree. I think all of those areas are really important, but I think knowing your audience is the magic ingredient because, well, after all, that's where it starts. If they don't understand your audience or find relevant what you're presenting, then I think your presentation has kind of failed before you've even got started. So even if you present in English, there's a good chance that the people that you're presenting to may also be non-native speakers. So it's really important to choose language that they understand and also language that you're comfortable with using as well. I could just hear a little noise. So if you have just joined us, please put yourself on mute. Thank you. Okay, so of course, this doesn't mean that you have to really use simple language. In fact, I'm assuming that you will be preparing for your presentation. So this is the chance to experiment. Why not try out some new language? Again, the language has to be something that your audience understands. But maybe you'd like to use some jargon or sector-related language, or perhaps you've heard a phrase that you'd like to use yourself. Well, now's the chance. So before you do use new language in a presentation, it's advisable to make sure that you're actually using the right word and that you're pronouncing it correctly. And a really good tool, an online free tool, to do this is called the Oxford Learner's Dictionary. And basically, this dictionary gives you a definition of the word that you want to use, but it also shows you the word in a sentence, so you can actually see how it connects with other words, as well as giving you the pronunciation. And you have a button where you can hear British and American pronunciation. So, okay, you now know who your audience is, you have a rough idea what you want to say to them. What else is important when giving a presentation? Well, perhaps you'd like to share some of your thoughts. So obviously we've had 3 in the poll there, your voice, visual aids, and knowing your audience. But are there any things that you think, yeah, that's really key, that's really important to consider or to know when giving a presentation? Please write your ideas in the chat. I can't see any at the moment. Well, I'll let you have a little think about that and we'll move on. Okay, so, well, I believe, let's have a quick look here. Yeah. Oh, another person has just joined. Sorry, I'm trying to do lots of things at once here. Okay, so, well, we already had about knowing our audience, but from this short animation, these are some of the areas I think are really important. So at the moment, I'm still referring to a presentation, so a sort of a larger talk. So I think it's important to use the rule of 3 in this situation. And the 3 basically indicates introduction, so starting off, the body, the main part of the presentation, sorry, and the conclusion or the summary. So I think these are really important areas to consider when you're creating a presentation. Another important area is to know your setup. So is it going to be offline? Is it online? Are you using different tools or apps? Again, you have to make sure that you are happy with using the software and that you know what you're doing before you start. I'm just going to open the chat because I see some people have now reacted. Indeed, body, the language, personality, that's a nice one. I like that idea. A good structure, great. Well, we just had that. Yeah. And the room setup, exactly. Yeah, all of the above. Brilliant. Yeah, the other thing I think is really important once you've got the format and you know your audience and you know your setup is to practice. So redo on this slide here, you'll see. Some people find this a bit tricky, or they're kind of reluctant, let's say, to practice too much because they don't want it to sound rehearsed and unnatural. But I think not practicing is definitely not helpful. You'll probably feel a bit nervous, I think, if you're giving a presentation or a talk in a second language. And you may then not want to try out that new language that we mentioned earlier for fear of maybe pronouncing it wrong or something happening. So practice is really key. Okay, so I think many of these you're probably already doing, or you notice people doing very well or not doing so well. So for the purpose of this webinar, I'm going to just focus in on voice and starting strong. So a strong start. Well, let's begin at the beginning. So you know your audience, you've got a good presentation, good content. How are you going to grab their attention? How are you going to make them listen to what you want to tell them or to say? Well, there are lots of ways of starting a presentation, and I've just picked a few that I think are the most popular, or certainly the ones I've used or heard other people using myself. So the first one is to share an interesting fact or figure. So this really helps to make your audience curious. Number 2 is to tell a story. So this could be something personal to you. I think this is actually quite a nice one because it shows that you're authentic. Number 3 is to use a quote. So that's, I think, great to get your audience thinking. You may want to begin, number 4, with a captivating image. So something really, a visual image, something really interesting to look at instead of some boring text. Or the last one, number 5, you may want to start by asking a question. Well, as I said, these are just a few ideas. Maybe you have other ideas, telling jokes, or now plenty of other ideas to kick off. But what I'd like to look at today is the question start, or using questions. But before we look at that, I would advise really, whatever you choose to do, is to find something that fits you. So if you're quite a visual person, then start with a captivating image. If you are somebody that likes the facts, then start with that. Use some statistics to prove your point. And if you're somebody that loves words, well, then you can start with a quote. So the advice really is to find what works for you, what you think says about your personality, what fits your personality rather. Okay, so let's have a look at the question option. Now, of course, you don't have to just ask a question at the beginning of a talk or presentation. Actually, in a Teams meeting, if you were presenting information, it might be also useful to ask questions. So I thought we'd have a look at 3 types of questions that you may want to use at the start or somewhere in your presentation. So the first one is interactive questions. So these are simply actual questions that require an answer. So yes, no, maybe, or perhaps something a bit broader or more explanation. Some examples of these are, do you find it hard to start a presentation? Do we really need this new tool? Where do your talents lie? And why would we want to take this seriously? So you've got lots of different questions there, yes, no questions, and broader, open questions. Number 2, what if? So these are actually hypothetical questions. So they show that something might or could or will happen or not happen. And these are really good actually for getting your audience on board with your ideas. So it can show them proof of a possible result. So if A happens, B will happen. With these, you're just going to say the A, you're going to give the example, and then hopefully you'll get them interested in thinking of the B answer, or at least later on you'll tell them and explain what the result or what the B part will be. So here is an example of some what ifs. What if I had never taken the job in the States and had just stayed in the town where I was born? What if you didn't have to work anymore? What if we turn the heating down 2 degrees? Now, you don't have to just use what if, you can also use a phrase like suppose or supposing. So the last one there, suppose we stopped working crazy hours and started to enjoy life. Okay, there is a few things to remember or to consider with this part or using this form of a question. And that's something to do with the verb, the action that you use after the what if or the suppose part. So if you want to show a possibility of something, then we use the what if plus a past form. So our examples were there. Oh yeah, what if I had never taken the job? So what would the possibility be if I hadn't done that? Or what if you didn't have to work anymore? What is the possibility? What would happen then? If you use a different verb, so not the past, but the present, and the example, I only have one example here, and that is, what if we turn the heating down? So turn is in the present tense. That is actually used as a suggestion. So what if questions can be used as to show a possibility or to show a suggestion. Okay, the last one, number 3. These are rhetorical questions, or this is a rhetorical question. We often use these for a dramatic effect. So we really want to make a point rather than actually just get an answer. So these are really good at encouraging your audience to listen to your idea. But of course, no actual answer is required, usually because it's obvious what the answer is. So here's an example of that. Which company has achieved 90% in customer satisfaction this year? Which company provides 24-hour services across the country? And which company scores highest in employee happiness? Of course, it's our company. Okay, so as I said, there's other different types of questions you can use, but basically you can use these at any point in a presentation or talk. Yes, okay. So this brings me nicely now to the next topic. So I think this is a really important topic, and that is your voice, or the presenter's voice. Now, before we dive into this a bit more, I want to share a short video of a memory I have of a teacher at school. So I will play the video and you can see what you think of this.
In 1930, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, in an effort to alleviate the effects of the, anyone? The Great Depression, passed the, anyone? The tariff bill, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, which, anyone, raised or lowered? Raised tariff.
Okay, I think I'll stop it there before we all fall asleep. So, of course, this is a teacher presenting information to teenagers, which aren't the easiest audience to present ideas to. But still, I think speaking in a very monotone way is probably the quickest way to lose your audience's attention. So, so we're going to have a little bit of a look at how you can change your intonation of your voice to, grab your audience's attention. Now, some people are just born with a voice full of emotion. However, some of us maybe, don't have that varying sounds in our voice. And I think it's actually quite hard to know how you sound to other people. And it's definitely difficult to know how you sound when you're presenting. So the tip is record yourself and listen back. I know it's quite confronting and perhaps you don't like listening to yourself or listening to your voice, but it's a really good tip. It's really worth, hearing what other people hear. Okay, and another area that might help you to think about how you talk is to understand why our voice rises and falls, or better said, at what points should it rise and fall? And what I mean by that is with sound, so going up and down. So actually, when we talk, we have something called content words in every part of speech. And content words are really important because they carry the meaning or the message for the listener. And content words are slightly higher or louder than other words in the sentence. So they stand out to your audience. So I've got another little activity for you. You don't have to put it in the chat. You can just do it for yourself. Maybe even read this out loud, but I'd like you to read this short text out loud and see if you can spot which words in this text are content words. So these are words that are really important that should sound slightly louder. Okay, maybe you have an idea. So let's have a look what you think. So I'm curious to know if you chose any of these. Everybody says things in different ways, so you could change it slightly, but this is how you could read it. So the first thing I figured out and learned, sometimes the hard way, about entrepreneurship is that the core, the essence of entrepreneurship is about making meaning. So obviously the bold are the content words. You might notice in this text that the content word, the words that aren't content words, so the words that are lower in sound, are usually words like articles. And what I mean by that are words like an, a, the. So we don't usually use those as content words. Other non-content words are prepositions. So those are those small words like of, about, in. And we don't really pronounce or rise in tone with words like and, that, but. Those are linking words. So those, generally speaking, are not content words. So another tip to make your intonation sound natural is to consider the speed that you talk, so how fast or slow you talk. I think we often underestimate how fast we speak. Even if it is a second language, it may feel like a normal pace, but often we speak a lot faster. And when you're presenting information, don't forget this is the first time that your audience is hearing this. You may have practiced it, gone over it You know what you want to say in your head, but this is the first time they hear it. So yeah, try to slow down a little bit. And if you do slow down while talking, it's also helps you, I think, enunciate or pronounce the words a bit better, especially those tricky ones that you might want to try out. We will now have a look at another area that might help with this intonation and figuring out, how to speak naturally. And this is called chunking and pausing. So all this means is when we group words together. So we group words in a kind of a package and we pause in certain points in sentences. And the reason for this is it helps to package that information for the listener. So it helps them to focus in on the important parts and digest or understand those parts as you're speaking. I have some examples here. So does it really matter whether people speak with an accent as long as they can be easily understood? Today, I'd like to share with you some tips on speaking with clarity. So those are possible points that you can pause or words that you can stick together. We're going to go back to that text again. So now we know the content points or the content words, but where are you going to then pause, or what words are you going to chunk together? So there are 7 chunks in this. So again, just for yourself, have a little think about where you would naturally pause or stop. Okay, let's have a quick look to see if you were right. So this is how you could do it. The first thing I figured out and learned, sometimes the hard way, about entrepreneurship is that the core, the essence of entrepreneurship is about making meaning. So, okay, so we've spoken about the importance of stressing content words. We've talked about chunking and pausing. But let's now have a quick look back at what we did earlier, which was the questions. So earlier we had different kinds of questions, and I'd like to know now your opinion about this. I've got another poll which I'll just set up. So do all questions follow the same pattern? That's what I'd like to know, and I will set it up now. So so do all questions go up at the end? That's the question. So it's a simple answer, yes or no. Is it launched? I think it's launched, but I'm not sure. Try again. No, I can't seem to launch this one. There's always a technical hiccup at some point. So maybe you can just put in the chat what you think. So the question is, do all questions go up at the end? Yes or no? No, not at all. No, okay, yeah, no, lots of no's. Yeah, well, you're right. They don't. So if we have a look at those examples that we had before, we can see yes, no answers do go up. So that's the key if you want to know, well, which ones do and which ones don't. If you ask questions with have, do, can, is, are. So do you find it hard to start presentations? Up. Do we really need this new new tool? Up. And questions that require more explanation, so open questions, often go down. So where do your talents lie? Why would we want to take this seriously? Okay, so now we've come to the second to last item for today, and that's something called signpost language. So signpost language are words and phrases that people use to signal to the listener what has just happened and what is going to happen next. So they're really useful because just like a signpost on the road, they help drivers know what to do, where to go. And there are lots of examples of signpost language. I'm just going to quickly show you a few here, and we will dive into some more in a moment. It can be as simple as let's now look at the next topic. Or you could begin, I'd like to begin by, or give an example. A good example of this is, or at the end, let's recap, shall we? So another little activity for you, a video. This is a great TED Talk actually by David J.P. Phillips at a TEDx in Stockholm. And his obviously a longer TED Talk, I've just taken a clip, is about how to use PowerPoint, well, basically tips on what to do and what not to do when it comes to using a PowerPoint. So I'd like you now to just listen out for signpost language. So listen out for things where he's going to talk about something next or refer to something he has just said. So here we go.
And it's with his words that I welcome you to How to Avoid Death by PowerPoint. Now, my objective for this evening, for this 18 minutes, is to give you 5 design principles that will cognitively and psychologically optimize your PowerPoint slides. And if you haven't used them before, they will make a tremendous difference to every PowerPoint you will be delivering from this day and on. So let's start. The first one of these 5 is one message. I received this from a customer and I said, hey, we've got a lot of issues in here, but let's start with the first one. You got 2 messages. Let's move one of them out of the way and just bring one message per slide. So why should we only have one message per slide? Well, I'll give you this beautiful example. You're at this nice party, you got the music going, boom, boom. You got this person you're chatting away to, you're having a good time. Cha-da, cha-da, cha-da.
Okay, so I'm curious if you spotted them. I'm just going to put them all up on the screen now, the ones that I spotted in this short clip. So you can see he used let's, that's a simple one. So let's start, let's move on, let's move one of them out the way. That was with regards to too much text on the screen. He also gave the example one, so I'll give you a beautiful example. And he actually started with my objective. So that was clearly stating what he was going to talk about. Now, there are lots of different phrases that you can use or signpost language, and I think it really depends on where you want to use the signpost language in the presentation. So if it's a longer one, you might need all of these 6 examples I'm going to show. And if it's just a quick explanation in a Teams meeting, you might just need a few. So I'll just very quickly go through some examples. So for introduction, you could have I'd like to begin, or my aim or purpose today is. For the body, you might want to, the body is the main part, of course, we had. You may want to move on to another topic. Let's move on to now, or turning to. You may also want to order things. So if you have 3 or 4 points to talk about, then make that clear. Firstly, secondly, thirdly, lastly. You may want to give examples, and it can be as simple as actually saying example, give an example. Or if you want to be a bit more fancy, you could say something like to illustrate this point. Perhaps at some point you want to compare and contrast ideas. You can use things like linking words like however, although, on the one hand, on the other hand, or similar to compare. And lastly, concluding or summarizing. Let's recap, or to conclude, or let's summarize. Okay, so we're speeding through now, and we've come to the last part of the webinar, which is visual aids. So in the TED Talk by David Phillips, he talks about the best ways to use a PowerPoint. Now, I'm sure that I can learn a lot from his TED Talk, so I'm just going to focus on the language rather than the actual visual aids. But I think we can all agree that visual aids are really important, especially in modern business. That being said, we have used them for a long time, and depending on your age, you may remember some of these kind of slides in the 90s. So this is like clip art and a bar chart. Obviously, fast forward to now, it's a bit more, a bit different and a bit more up to date in the way we present information. This is also quite a simple bar graph, but what I'd like to just very quickly show you is some of the language that you could use to clearly point to where you want your audience to look. So where you want them to focus on the slide, especially if you have a lot of information. So you could say something like, if you look at this slide, you can see on the left-hand side how graphic design was a leading form of visual communication in 2011. So this is represented by the green bar. On the vertical axis, you can see there is a 20% difference between graphic design and web design, shown here by the blue bar. Now, obviously, you can also use a pointer, but even then, I think it's important to use language to clearly point to what you want them to look at. This is a second example. You have different kinds of lines. You have a broken line here at the top. So if you're referring to the broken line, say that. For example, the broken line shows our goal to maintain 60 days maximum time spent on getting the product from the factory to the customer. Another example would be looking at the orange line. So you could say something like, as you can see by the orange solid line, there was a sharp fall in supplying our products internally between January and March. Now, there are loads of different kinds of charts, diagrams, graphs that you may need to use in some form of presentation, and a lot of language that goes with that. So my advice is, if this is a key part of your job and you have to do it a lot, it may be worth investing in a training to learn that and to help you communicate your desired message. Yeah, okay. Now we have nearly come to the end. So before we finish up, let's have a quick look back at what we've done. So we had a look at knowing your audience and the importance of matching content and language to your audience, and also using language that you want to experiment with, but making sure that you feel comfortable with that before you do it. Starting strong, however that may be, choose what works for you, but grab the audience's attention straight off. Use questions, could be any form of question to get their attention. Voice, don't forget about how you sound. Record yourself. Might feel a bit uncomfortable, but very worth it to hear, to listen back to how you sound to others. Use signpost language, really important. Guide your audience through what you're saying. And if you do have to refer to visual aids, make sure that you clearly state or clearly show where you want your audience to look and what you want them to focus in on. So that's it. We ran a little bit over, but if anybody does have any questions, please ask now. Please put them in the chat.
We did have one question earlier. If you would mind just repeating the Oxford website.
Oh, yes, of course. Yes, it's Oxford Learners Dictionary. If you type that into any Google search, it will come straight up. Oxford Learners Dictionary. I'll just open the chat to see if there's any other questions. Yeah, thank you, Paul. You wrote it in the chat.
Give it another moment and see if anybody's typing.
Yeah.
All right, if we don't have any other questions, thank you very much, Virginia. To everybody else, next week, you'll receive an email from us with a bit more information, and thank you very much for coming. There is another question real quick. Will we send out the presentation?
We will, yes, absolutely. You'll receive that.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay, thanks. Have a great day.